We've heard the mothers of the two police officers who were killed, Matthew Arnold and Rachel McCrow, talk about how they were kept largely in the dark for a long time about their loved ones' final moments. They insist that lessons must be learned and that there was a systemic failure and that their deaths could have been prevented. Now, the coroner in this inquest will be asked to decide about things like whether these constables were given enough information about the state of mind of the trains, what was known, whether things like radio communications were, the systems were properly put in place, and whether there was enough information that had been passed on from New South Wales Police, from a person close to Nathaniel Train, who'd received threats from Gareth Train and made it clear to them that Gareth was very hostile to police. So that's something that the coroner will be taking some months after the closure of this inquest to rule on.
What else can you tell us, Josh, about what we've heard over the last 5 weeks?
Well, the inquest saw some, harrowing footage from some of the police victims, from the neighbour just prior to his death, Alan Dare, who was shot when he went to investigate a burning vehicle at the front of the property. It's also revealed some footage of a police officer who narrowly escaped with his life and had to be guided out by a superior on a mobile phone because the police radio wasn't working. We also heard a lot about the motivations of the trains. We had an expert in extremism talk about how they more or less carried out an act of terrorism by targeting authorities with violence to further the ends of, what he called an extremist ideology, which is an apocalyptic extremist Christian ideology, the idea that the world is nigh, the end of the world is nigh, and that the trains believed that they were soldiers of God looking to repel the forces of evil in the form of government and police agents. We also heard from a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Andrew Aboud, who works for the Queensland government, who found that the 3 murderers in this case suffered from what he described as a folie à trois, which is a rare case of a group psychosis. He found that there was a primary sort of agent in this group psychosis, that was Gareth Train, who suffered delusions and paranoia and a personality disorder from much earlier in his life. And that somehow his paranoid delusions somehow came to infect both his brother Nathaniel and his wife Stacey. And ultimately, they had these delusions and these conspiracy theories that led them to carry out these atrocious acts. He said that had the trio survived this exchange with police, that he didn't believe they would be found fit for a murder trial and they would have been committed. Gareth, probably for the rest of his life, but with Stacey, and to a greater extent Nathaniel, there was a prognosis of potential recovery from this psychosis, and that they may ultimately be released and recover.
And you investigated the trains for background briefing, Josh, thanks to your own connection to them. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Ros. Well, it was one of those scenarios which is pretty rare for a journalist, where you have a personal involvement. You know somebody who winds up in the headlines doing these unbelievable things. In my case, I was actually a friend of Nathaniel's. He was in my friendship group in primary school. He came to my house. I had a good sense of his character. And so I was, like many who knew him, astonished when I saw what took place. And that really provoked curiosity for me. I had to reconcile how he could go from the very promising, gifted young man that I knew, the very moral young man that I knew, to an unhinged murderer. I had to reconcile that both on a journalistic and a personal level. One of the things that I found was that earlier in their lives, they had formed a bond that led to their complete estrangement and alienation from their own families. And it appears, well, it's possible that this was one of the first manifestations of this group delusion, of them buying into sort of a joint belief that was unhinged. In this case, they accused members of their own family of sexually abusing them. It appears without any evidence whatsoever. Dr. Andrew Aboud found the allegations that the Train brothers made against their parents frankly bizarre. But what is strange after, making these wild accusations and cutting off ties with all of their families, Nathaniel and to an extent Stacey went on to lead quite successful careers as primary school educators. They wound up principals. Nathaniel in particular was very successful in disadvantaged schools and wound up in a high-paying job in New South Wales in his mid-40s. He was on the fast track for a senior role in education. And so it was like they were living these lives in parallel. They were relatively isolated, particularly Gareth and Stacey, and so the warning signs from their extreme beliefs were really closely held, and that was one of the problems with how this tragedy unfolded. Is that some of the more alarming things that would have made people realise that this could end catastrophically were basically kept within that strange triangle that these three people had, and that is one of the things that police and the coroner are wrestling with. Should they have known more? How could they have known? Should they have taken more seriously the warning signs that were known? And we'll see where the coroner arrives with that.
Good to talk to you, Josh. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross.